My greetings and a warm welcome here. My name is George Hawkins. I'm the past director of DC Water and the founder of Moonshot Missions, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to a program on water infrastructure as a driver of economic recovery, equity, and resilience. We all know that we're at the moment in time where we have a generational investment that's possible for infrastructure broadly in the United States. And the question is the importance of that infrastructure investment for water. And I'm joined today by a spectacular panel of leaders from government, from public utilities, from water technology company, and probably the foremost lobbyist on water issues in Washington, D.C., to delve into these questions and gain insights for the benefit over the next hour. I do want to say we're delighted to be here on Monday, the first day of 5 days that will be devoted to infrastructure here on Infrastructure Week, and delighted to be the first program to focus on water infrastructure. President Biden opened up this Infrastructure Week earlier today with a statement of the importance to this administration and his plans for a more than $1 trillion in investment in infrastructure, including significant investment for water. So that's our purpose today, is to highlight the importance of that investment on water infrastructure and gain insights about not just why it's important, but how it should be invested. I do want to thank Xylem for hosting us today at this facility. We'll hear a little bit more about that at the end of the program, and also our co-sponsors, the U.S. Water Alliance, the Water Environment Federation, the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, three of the many wonderful organizations that are working on our behalf here in Washington and across the country to raise the importance of water in our society. Now, this panel is incredible on infrastructure. I did a little bit of research right before we began. And the economic evaluation is that for every $1 invested in infrastructure, the economy returns $1.50. Imagine that 150% of your investment is returned if we put it in infrastructure, or put it in business terms, the same article, 17% rate of return. Think of that, Patrick, on water infrastructure investment. So this is a critical moment. Infrastructure does not just employ people and products and services in the building of the infrastructure. By investing in infrastructure, it improves every other business, every other community in its ability to produce, because it's an underlying cost of every other element of the economy. So by investing in infrastructure, we support everyone and everything. And with water, it is also essential to every person, every family, every community, and every living organism, and every ecology and economic and environmental system in the country. Extraordinary opportunity. So let me turn to the panel today. I will say, by the way, seeing us in person, the first panel I've done in person in over a year. We are following all the protective procedures that are warranted by CDC and the District of Columbia government. Everybody on this panel has been vaccinated, as well as the wonderful staff that is supporting us today. So we're being safe, as well as, I hope, delivering an incredible array of information. So let me get to the panel. I'm so excited. I'll ask a few questions, and I'm going to sit back just like the rest of you and listen and learn from the panel we have before us. So first, Andrew Sawyers. Oh, by the way, incredible friends here. This is an incredible panel. I'm just so pleased to be here. And the first question's theme is about the importance of investment in water. Why is it so important? Why today? What the benefit for the country? And now, Andrew, for those of you who don't, and in the water sector, everybody knows. Director of the Wastewater Division at U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, in my opinion, one of the finest public servants in the country. But he has a background. He ran the state agency in Maryland that was running the revolving funds, helping local communities invest. So this topic of how to invest funds to improve the environment, ecology, and infrastructure is something that's been on Andrew's mind his entire career. By the way, he also has a PhD in water environmental engineering. So Andrew, what do you think? What's on the agenda today? Why is this so important?
So George, I think one of the key points you made in terms of just the value, the economic value of water. If you think about the president's agenda and the investments that you're thinking about, it takes me back to almost a decade ago when we implemented the American Recovery Act. And there's some fundamental things that I think help to shape what we see, frankly, in this very building where we are today, in terms of just some of the green infrastructure type development that we've seen. So I think when you think about the environmental and infrastructure development at this point, I think we're at a point where it's really crucial to harness the opportunity, frankly, and perhaps create a legacy that will be very critical going forward for the next 50 years. As you mentioned, and when you think about environmental improvements, when you think about infrastructure investments that are on the horizon, it is absolutely crucial. You think about economic development, you think about environmental enhancement, you think about social progress, frankly. And perhaps most importantly, one of the things that the agency is really focused on now, and I will get to this later on, is perhaps the import of how we address low-income communities and people of color communities across the nation. I do think the investments that we're thinking about can potentially create a legacy, a framework for us to do to focus on going forward. Water is at the heart of every single community in this nation. And so as we think about the investments that are being contemplated, they will be at the heart of every community in this nation. So why now? You know, Radhika Fox, who is the nominee for the Office of Water, has this saying, it is water's moment. And I think we fundamentally have to seize this moment, because this moment, if we seize it, and if we, if we sort of operationalize it the way I think we can, we will create a legacy that will be long lasting. So that's why I think right now, George, that we just have to make sure we harness the opportunity that's ahead of us. We could create a legacy that will be long lasting.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for referencing Radhika Fox, who's a friend of all of ours, and we're delighted to see her nominated and look forward to that being complete. And you mentioned a lot of multiple benefits that come from water infrastructure, focus on the heart of everything of a local community, seizing this moment, as Radhika says, and the opportunity before us. And building on that, I'll turn to the our next panelist, my good friend Kishia Powell. Kishia is the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of DC Water, the water utility that's a one water utility. So it's drinking water and wastewater and stormwater for the nation's capital, and also on a wholesale basis, 1.6 million people in Virginia and Maryland. I believe it's the only water utility in the United States that has a service area that crosses state boundaries, and it crosses two. But Kishia's had an incredible 20+ year career in the water utility world. I first met her when she was in Baltimore, then proceeded to Jackson and Atlanta, and is now back home here at DC Water. I'm delighted because of all the good work she's doing where I live. So it's wonderful. And she is also, I didn't realize this when I read this, you are a professional engineer in DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
That's
so
right.
We have a PhD here and a registered engineer. That's incredible. But Kishia, what have you learned? You're running one of the leading water utilities. You've had experience in so many others. What is your sense of what you've learned, and how can it shape the investments that we hope to come?
Yeah, I think you opened by saying everything there is to say about investing in water infrastructure. The economic opportunity that we have, and I wanted to be able to quote my good friend Radhika, but
Go for it.
This is water's moment for so many reasons. I mean, when we think about the time that we're in, this is not just about investing in hard infrastructure. This is about investing in the social and economic fabric of communities that have been historically underserved. And because of the opportunities that we have in terms of investing in infrastructure and water utilities being able to take the lead, integrated planning is not just a guidepost for clean water utilities. When I was in Jackson, Mississippi as the director, and I had everything infrastructure, we penned an infrastructure replacement plan to leverage a 1% sales tax that talked about using investments in water infrastructure as the driver to invest in everything else, because you don't want to repave streets that has 100-year-old water main underground, or sewers where you don't know the condition. Many communities are strapped with consent decrees that cost a lot of money and take away from being able to invest in other infrastructure. But it has to all come back to a center point, and that is really leveraging this opportunity that we have to invest, not just as one sector, but to work together in a whole of infrastructure approach to start investing in a way that really builds back better. And we'll talk about what that really means. It is investing in a way that allows us to achieve equity-based outcomes, that allows us to address environmental injustices. So we're not just putting the money in the ground so that we have new pipes, but we've got to make sure that we're building up communities and that those communities have an opportunity, if we do it in the right way, that they're not overburdened financially, that every community has an opportunity to be resilient in the face of climate change, that every community has an opportunity to take advantage of the economic, social, and environmental benefits that come from making those investments.
Thank you, Kishia. That was amazing. And for those of you in the sector, on behalf of NACWA, Kishia recently testified in front of Capitol Hill on this topic, and I can see why. And there's some very common themes, and at least in my perception, represent such a change from even when we first met. Both of you have focused on community engagement and how important utilities are for building community. I don't think that would have been a topic 10 years ago. It would have been all about pipes and valves and fixing equipment.
Right.
And what you're highlighting is the importance of building a community. What a wonderful—
And being an anchor institution.
Anchor. I love the phrase. Yeah. And we'll definitely come back to that. But I also loved the notion that you've connected, particularly from your experience in Jackson, that water infrastructure isn't by itself. It's connected to all the other. And I know here in DC, if we tore up a road and then 3 months later, you'd come back and tear it up because some other infrastructure agency was coming along, that would generate so much complaints from the people. They're paying for it over and over. And how we can do this in a coordinated fashion so it's delivers even more, I think, is a wonderful message. So let me move to our next panelist, my good friend, Patrick Decker. He's the chief executive of Xylem. Xylem is a company that I know well, DC Water knows well from my days back then. It's an international company doing services across the globe, but based here in the United States, founded and formed here in the US. And I've known Patrick for many years, and he's as enthusiastic and a committed leader as I have ever met, and sort of embodying the notion of doing well by doing good. And I won't go through all the awards that Xylem has received for not just being a good company and employing people and driving economic benefit, but doing wonderful things in the community. So Patrick, delighted that you're here, because one of the messages we have is about not just that this is an important moment for water infrastructure, but how and what. How should we be investing? So you've had experience in your company from across the world. What do you think, what can we learn? What can we, at this moment for our investments here, that will make sure that these investments are smart?
Well, first of all, thank you, George, and thanks to all the panelists for coming out today. You all are very busy people, so we really appreciate you joining us here. The way we look at it as Xylem is we refer to it as the opportunity of a lifetime. When you think about the three great challenges, I would say opportunities, but challenges that we face around the world, but certainly here in the US, is around the scarcity of water in many forms. It is building resilient infrastructure to climate events. And third, how do you address all that in a way that's affordable, both at a community level, but also at a household level? And the reason we refer to this as the opportunity of a lifetime is because when you think about different grand challenges that are out there, the World Economic Forum says that by 2050, up to 25% of the world's population is going to be facing absolute water scarcity. In the US today, there are estimates that for those that are earning the lowest 20% wages across the country, the water bill can represent up to 20% of their net take-home pay. It's unbelievable. But yet we have all these challenges in front of us to build new infrastructure or refurbish the aging infrastructure that we have around us. And so how do we do that in a way that's affordable? We think it's an opportunity of a lifetime because the innovation and the technology that exists today, which didn't exist 10 years ago, can do all that in a very, very affordable way. But we have to educate our communities and our political leaders as to what the options are that are out there. And it's not limited to Xylem. There are a lot of companies in the space. Our tagline is let's solve water. I always say, remove the apostrophe, George. It becomes let us solve water. We do it together. but we have to convene the conversation. And I really believe that now is the time to have that conversation. And, you mentioned in your opening, it's not just doing the right thing for society. This is about job creation. $1.50 return on every dollar invested is about job creation, and not just the immediate job, it's the jobs beyond that. And so, what we're trying to do right now, George, is to really drive the discussion around how innovation and technology can disrupt, and I'll give some examples later, disrupt the traditional model of how we fund these kind of investments. We're very excited. I think, as was said earlier, if we don't do it now, it ain't ever going to happen. This is our moment in time. It really is.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. And I appreciate you reminding us the scale of challenge for low-income families in this country and across the world, and the growing challenge of water scarcity, or on the converse side, water flooding, which with extreme weather, on top of everything else, is making this work all the harder. And I look forward to coming back to hearing some of the technologies that exist to help through this, because as we all know, it is darn expensive to do it the old-fashioned way.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be.
Right.
I love that message. Turning now to Adam Krantz. Adam is the Chief Executive of NACWA, the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. He's been there for just over 20 years. But has a background in media and a lawyer. So we have a businessman, we have an engineer, we have a PhD, and a lawyer on the panel. So good diversity.
Dangerous.
But I know Kishia is vice president of NACWA, so he's one of your board officers here. But NACWA is one of the top lobbyists in DC, representing all of us and making sure that on Capitol Hill and with the Environmental Protection Agency and others, that our interests are principled but represented. So you have been involved in this for a long time. And I know from my own friendship with you, you felt for a long time this investment has been needed and been coming. So what about today? What's your sense of why this is the moment today after all that you've seen?
First of all, George, thank you for having us. Thanks to Xylem for hosting us in this beautiful building. And it's great to be here maskless with friends and colleagues for the first time for me doing a panel without our masks on. So this is the beginning of what I think is a new and exciting sort of page in our history, but it's also exciting for infrastructure. And like you said, I've been at this for quite some time, both through NACWA and before that, writing about water issues and also being a lawyer. For me, I have good friends with Radhika Fox, and we're really excited for her nomination to go through. I think it's on Wednesday in a couple of days, and she has been talking beautifully about water's moment. One thing that I've learned over the last couple of decades, frankly, is there is an inequity, if you will, in terms of how water as an infrastructure sector is treated from the standpoint of federal investment. All other infrastructure sectors, whether you look at transportation, education, hospitals, roads, bridges, are funded more along the lines of 60% federal investment, 40% local, state. It's exactly the opposite in the context of water infrastructure, where we have 95% local investment and 5% federal investment. That to me is something that needs to be addressed very directly. There's nothing more important than water infrastructure, George. I remember we used to have these conversations. Life depends on water. Every job depends on water. Every business on water. Every aspect of our lives, our health, sanitation, you name it, on water. So I think it is time for us to be treated equally. So the one thing I just want to note is, while I think we are on the cusp and have already seen in many respects that this is water's moment needs to become permanent. And that federal investment needs to be something that doesn't last once and done or over a 5-year period. It has to be ensconced in policy and in funding through Congress and the federal government in a way we simply have not yet seen to date. So while we're working on things that I think are critical in the context of the stimulus plan, we've also seen the Health and Human Services Department now overseeing for the first time a low-income household water assistance program called LIWAP, meant to help utilities who have low-income ratepayers help with their arrearages, unpaid bills, et cetera. So we are seeing the beginning of targeting it in a more equitable way through the assistance side of the ledger, ways to help low-income households very directly in a manner we have not yet seen. These are good things. It is water's moment, but we need to build on them and leverage them to make this more permanent. And I know, having heard from the 4 previous speakers, we're in a stronger position than we've ever been. We have smarter, more able, more capable people running water utilities, working at EPA, working in Congress than we've ever had before. Water needs to be a bipartisan priority. And I think we're on the cusp of something very special here. So it's exciting to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Adam. And I appreciate you mentioning the low-income water assistance program. I've been an advocate for years, having managed the low-income heating assistance program. I always wondered, why is there support? Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's the right policy for heating assistance, but not for water. We do have a temporary program, significantly funded, and we'd like to make it permanent. And I appreciate this is a moment in time to grasp the opportunity, but how to also make the opportunity permanent. Now, just while we, just to stay focused on you for a second. So people who are watching this, Radica's hearing is on Wednesday, infrastructure bill is in front of Congress. What should people have on their mind that they can do, their organizations, their utilities? You're the lead here and one of the leads here at DC. What's your recommendation for how they can join and support us in seeking these outcomes?
That's a great point, George. And the one thing everyone has to do is raise their voices. Now's the time with your members of Congress, Senate, and the House, with our friends in federal government at EPA, et cetera. We need to let everybody know that we can, that this is the time now to invest in water meaningfully. The president's stimulus package, the Biden-Harris package, does a very good job. I think we're at around $111 billion in that, out of a $1 trillion sort of amount of money. But if you look at transportation, right, writ large, right, so whether it's Amtrak, roads, bridges, you name it, across the board, surface transportation, ports, they're still getting $600 to $700 billion. Water deserves to be on an equal footing with those infrastructure areas. So this is a huge, great start. We're in there. Right. We mentioned the ARRA under President Obama, the American Recovery Act. We were in there to the tune of around $5 to $7 billion of a $75 billion bill. Now we're looking at $1 trillion and being about 100 billion of that. But everyone needs to write their members of Congress and say it's time for water to be treated on an equal footing with every other aspect of infrastructure, core infrastructure. As a result of the pandemic, last thing I'll say, as a result of the pandemic, for the first time in our nation's history, water workers are now deemed to be essential workers. Okay, that should have happened when the Clean Water Act passed 50 years ago, right? It took us 50 years just to get to that point, and that better stick and stay there. But if we're essential workers, then we need to be treated along the lines of other essential infrastructure areas, and we need to see that reflected in funding. NACWA's position has always been money matters. It's never mattered more than today.
Thank you, Adam. And that's a startling statistic that in most infrastructure areas, federal government it's a 60-40 breakdown, and in water it's 95-5. Despite, but I'm going to come to Kishia next because I have a thought that when we started is how water's now become a part of the community. But as we look back 10, 15, or 20 years, it was hidden. So it could be that these other things, which seem so much more prominent in the role of someone's daily life, we know water is, but it hasn't been featured that way, that's changing. So the parallel can support each other. And also don't forget what Adam just said, the advantage of this issue is every jurisdiction. It doesn't matter what party you're in. It doesn't matter big, small, every place relies on water, and you get a message to your congressional delegation. This should be a bipartisan issue because everybody cares about it. But this question of community engagement, Kishia, I want to come back to you because it's been so much a part of what I know of your career and how utilities are transforming into, the phrase you used, community anchor. I love that phrase. How do you foresee an infrastructure package enabling a utility to become more of a community anchor? What's the pathway forward?
And that's Andy Cricken's phrase. So I just want to give him full credit because he always talks about
Andy,
being,
you're here in spirit.
That's right. He always talks about this concept of us being anchor institutions in the community because there are so many opportunities to put people to work. When I think about the program that we did in Atlanta with a partnership with the Department of Corrections to give men an opportunity to be fathers again, transition out of, 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 of incarceration into full-time jobs with the utility. That just show the importance of the work that we do and what we have, the potential that we have as a water sector. And again, I think, you know, so much of what's been said, it depends on the funding, certainly. I heard a quote from someone that said, we need to not just think about roads, railways, and runways, and think about water, wastewater, and watersheds. We don't do that enough in this country. We don't value what is out of sight and out of mind the same as we do with transportation. So, but yet, many of the issues that are impacting people in our communities, especially the most vulnerable communities where infrastructure is concerned, is related to water. We saw that with the flood of homes on September 10th in the district. More than 300 homes were impacted by sewer backups because of a major flooding event. And at this particular time, it's impacting communities that can ill afford to recover. And so we have to really think about, as we move forward, how do we make sure that those communities are protected? How do we make sure that they're lifted up? How do we invest so that they don't continue to have the same issues again? I saw a story with, in a community in New York where, you know, there was a continuous sewer backup for years that has just gone unaddressed. And that's unacceptable. So I think, you know, yes, we have to invest in a way that allows us to improve the condition of our infrastructure, because we know as utilities that we are required to provide a level of service that our infrastructure is not allowing us to keep up with. We also know that trends, changing climates is causing so many impacts. When you look at what's happened in the southeastern and southwestern states in the country with the snowstorm and the freeze and being out of water, if it's not that, then we have periods of drought or we have too much rain. But all of these things are causing significant impacts on the same communities over and over and over again. And so if we don't invest in the right way, we're not able to achieve outcomes that allow those communities to thrive on equal footing. So when we see the opportunities for job creation and economic development in a city, it often goes to one part of the city where people want to invest because they don't want to invest where it's going to continue to flood. But those folks that live there, they have to grapple with that. And we have to do it in a way that when we do invest, it doesn't change the fabric of the community. It doesn't push people out. Those are lessons that we've learned as well, that we have to do it in a way that allows everybody to take full advantage of those opportunities, whether it be improving water quality or just putting in a new water main or replacing lead service lines. That's a concern that we're confronted with many older communities, and trying to make sure that we remove barriers so that everybody has an opportunity to have a lead service line replacement. Thinking about the little things in terms of how we do our work so that it is really meaningful to the community. And that causes us to have to speak to people. We have to understand not what we believe we should be doing with the money that they're paying in rates, but what is it that they say they need? What is it that members of the community, our real true stakeholders, say they need and they want to be able to live the quality of life that they want to live?
I took so many notes on what you said, I can't read them anymore, but I love that. And I'm particularly struck where you concluded, because I think it's one of the themes here is how the sector is changing from what a hidden material into this community anchor, as our friend Andy Cricken had phrases it. Wonderful that you raised his name. He's such a wonderful person. But the notion, the seemed to link in not too long ago, when a utility we would work for was thinking of projects, it was an engineering question. It was in-house. You had a priority list, maybe. You hope to have some asset management program to identify, but the notion of reaching out to the community and engaging them in how those decisions were made didn't even come up. And your notion, an investment in a place, partly is engineering, of course, but it's also all of the benefits that come from it and what can go back to that community is something that has to be part of the utility, and then circles back around and gaining support and elevating our presence and visibility. It all becomes it's a great message.
Right.
Just go ahead. Sure.
We can no longer act like we have the market cornered on knowledge. And when we go out to the community, it can't just be to tick a box. And I heard this so much in my time that, community members, they want to be valued and compensated for the knowledge that they're giving you as well. They don't just want you to come for one meeting and have a discussion about what needs to be done. They want their input to be valued and to be captured. And now I think the paradigm has changed. Community members want to be engaged in developing the solution. They want an opportunity to say what that solution should look like and what the outcomes of that solution should be. So it shouldn't just be that we no longer flood here. It should also be that we are revitalizing the community in different ways. Yeah.
I think it's incredible. And it represents so much of the change that you're driving in the utilities you've worked with, that you're working with the Department of Corrections. And that's not usual for a water utility in the past. And now making all these relationships, it's really one other quick comment to follow you. I really was also fascinated by your notion that it's very hard to deliver the level of service that we're expected given the state of infrastructure. Just for some of the folks who might be joining us today that may not be aware of the sort of the general condition of water infrastructure in the country, which is not our current fault, but because of a lack of investment in the past, what's the condition that we're facing today with this investment as a possible solution?
Right. So if you're in the water sector, then you pretty much know that our infrastructure has failing grades, and that's not acceptable for any student. It certainly isn't acceptable for the infrastructure of the United States of America. Given what we have to support, it's critically important. But I think it is important for, as Adam said, having people have to call their members of Congress. And we need to make sure they have the right talking points, that it's not acceptable for us to have infrastructure that is failing. We had a lot of help to put this infrastructure in the ground. Now we have billions of dollars of assets that we have to manage, but that is being managed by the ratepayers. As Adam said, we have about 5% of federal help. And compared to other infrastructure sectors, that is not acceptable. We've got to maintain our infrastructure to make sure that we all know now that you cannot be without safe, clean drinking water and sanitation services. It's critically important. And there is a price tag to that, to support it, to continue supporting it, to make sure that we are taking care of billions that all of our ratepayers have invested in. I think it's not only a public health issue, public safety issue, it could also be considered a matter of national security. And I think, just making sure that everyone in Congress knows that water infrastructure is infrastructure, and that there is an imperative for the federal government to help provide funding to maintain and support it is also important. There are projects of regional significance, just like any other sector. So this is the time to really push those messages to make sure that folks know that our infrastructure is not in a state not in the state that it should be in to support our day-to-day quality of life.
Thank you, Kishia. And you heard it again, the importance of this infrastructure as a catalyst to so much in the community. And despite the essential work of water officials, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Adam, it is such a remarkable feature that in a pandemic at the scale that we faced, that water has always been there, despite the need to be on site. That's not something you can do from afar when there's a problem with a pipe or you have to do something to treat you. Some have to be on hand. And water is an essential part of the response to the epidemic, and it has always been there. It's just testimony. But despite those valiant efforts, what you're highlighting is that water infrastructure is in bad shape. It gets grades you never want to see on a report card for something that important. You just can't let that stand. And we're hearing, we have got to stand up. I'm coming back to you, Andrew. You had referenced this before, so I'm not going to let you get away with
All right.
explain more about what you meant. And that was what we learned from the ARRA stimulus. So this is not the first time, a much bigger opportunity for the investment we have before us. I was running DC Water during the ARRA. We've had this conversation about the strengths and weaknesses of what we learned from that. It's almost as if we had the trial run, significant trial run. And now here we get another chance. What did we learn from your perspective that we can benefit from today and how we would invest these funds?
So I think we've learned a lot, but as I'm listening to this conversation, Kishia, mentioned some incredibly important things, and Adam and Patrick, and you all know me, it's kind of tough not to actually opine on some of those. But
Go for it.
So I want to touch on some of those quickly, and then I'll get to ARRA. One of the really important points that I think Kishia made was the issue, frankly, when you think about the government's role. We are fundamentally responsible for helping to ensure that there's public trust and confidence in how we address and deliver water infrastructure. And so there's much more to be done there. We need to make sure that, and to your point, George, as we have gone through this pandemic over the last 14 months, I don't think there's a community across this country that has actually lost water or have significant issues, unless it's historical or legacy issues around sanitation. So the public can count on water. And in many ways, the government has a significant role there. The other key issue, as you think about the concept of community engagement, I think the government also has a significant role of ensuring that communities stay where they live. And so the point that Kishia made in terms of regentrification, if you will, is something that I think the government will fundamentally have to, focus on in some ways, and ensuring as we leverage the investments, whether it's with the private sector or local government, that investment ensure that community members who live in those communities continue to live there. The idea of being an anchor institution is something that we've talked a little bit about that recently. It is such an important point. A very good friend of mine reminded me recently, in every single community across this nation, you have water lines and wastewater lines running under their homes, every single community. And frankly, without water and wastewater services, we could see significant public health water quality issues. Perhaps no other infrastructure in this country can actually say the same thing. And so the import of water and elevating the sector and having the continued conversation about how important water is, and making sure that investments that are actually being made now leverage and continue to sort of focus communities and keeping them where they are, improving access, that is fundamentally important. The government also has a fundamental role in addressing the broader issue of affordability. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about affordability today, but I think to Patrick's point, when a community member or household person can say, after all the bills are paid, 20% of their income is going towards water and wastewater services. That is something that I think we as a government, as an association, as a utility, as a private sector, we have to figure out a way to come together and start to think about how best to address the broader affordability issue. And so I would encourage, I think the government has a strong role, but I think, as partners across the board, we also need to think through that lens. And then finally, in this space, and I think, Adam, you mentioned this, not just the anchoring process, because I think, Andy's brilliant, but again, I think that we need to continue to elevate the sector. But the other issue I would want to raise on the water and wastewater utilities
there's such a critical nexus for water utilities in this sort of elevation portfolio, if you will, the energy water resource recovery nexus.
Mhm.
What energy happens to be one of the most significant costs for any water, for water facilities across the country. And so as they think about repurposing, whether it's the waste or manure or other things, they can not only provide energy for their systems, but they now become the backup grid for the hospitals, for the schools. And so this is the foundation to the point you made earlier, Patrick, in terms of water institution being the resilient framework foundation for communities going forward. So many of those, the government obviously has a key role, but I also think as partners we do. To your last point, George, in terms of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, I think so much can be learned from that. At that time, I used to run Maryland's water and wastewater financial programs. And we spent a significant amount of time focusing on just some of the structural, some of the procedural issues, waive and match and, making sure we're complying and reporting. But I think the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, if one thing it has taught us is that there is a capacity for us to actually take a closer look. And maybe to both George and your point, George, and Adam and Patrick and Kishia, there's a legacy element to it. I go back to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. At that time, we did not see significant investments in green infrastructure. We did not see significant investments in technology innovation in the water sector. We did not see significant investments in energy efficiency. And so those, because of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, we have seen those propagate and become significant parts of footprints of communities across this country. We also saw the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act playing a significant role in climate reduction in terms of, providing resources to address school buses, getting them to, move from, diesel that was, polluted in many of these communities to ultra low sulfur fuel, which actually helped many students on those buses with asthma. It also helped like underground storage tanks. So there is a legacy associated with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that we can actually, learn from. I do believe as we think about the broader infrastructure investments ahead of us, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act have sort of provided a platform for us. It has provided the model for us. There are three things that I would say we could potentially go ahead on in terms of using this investment to frame as legacy portfolio. One is the broader issue of community engagement, the broader issue of community investment, creating a model for us as we invest in communities going forward. We have a real platform. We have something that will be sustainable in the long run, not just for this year or next year, but a sustainable community framework going forward. That is one. I also think too, and particularly important for us, is this broader issue of using the new investments ahead of us to address some of the intractable pollution issues that this country faces. Nutrients, for instance. I do believe we have an opportunity to start thinking about perhaps a new nutrient trading platform. Maybe the investments can help us to do that. We have issues like PFAS. We have emerging contaminants. We have lead. One of the key things that we could use this investment to is actually help us to sort of incentivize the American workforce of the future. I think about the president made a sort of a significant statement. We need to reduce lead service line by 100%. The American workforce of the future, plumbers will be needed. And so this is an opportunity for us to invest in plumbers, in architects and planners and engineers that can help to build what America will need to look like going forward. So I think the Recovery Act has sort of created that template for us, has created the framework. Essentially, we do need to just, we need to start thinking about how to, sort of incentivize, how to implement, how to deploy that framework into what America, into what our communities should look like going forward, George.
Wow, Andrew. I think everyone who's watching today has a sense of why we love having Andrew in the job he's got. This is just one of the best, not just public servants, just water leaders for any sector. And
Awesome.
incredible. And I loved what you started with, public trust and confidence. I know that's what Kishia was talking about. That is the core of what any utility or company wants to deliver. But it's interesting because in some respects, what both of you have been talking about is maybe 10 years ago it was about pipes and equipment. in one hand, it's the community benefits that come from it as an anchor for engagement with people who need help and rebuilding communities. And the other is all these other parallel benefits, talking about climate and energy and stormwater management at the street level and flooding, that there's all these parallel benefits. And I think that may be a unique feature of the water sector investments that, again, makes us special. And why we deserve this attention, as Adam's been saying. But I'm going to turn it back to you, Patrick, because one of the topics that everyone has touched on is affordability. And I know that all of us are, and the statistic you noted originally about 20% of the populace who are paying, it's just, how do people not afford or have such, you can't not pay your water bill. And what I was always aware of, if we did cut someone off from water, which I was loath to do, they're still going to get water. It's something that has to happen, probably buying it at 20 times the cost at a 7-Eleven. I mean, it's just terrible circumstances on that front. But part of what Andrew sort of set up is the notion of what's possible today, because affordability, bottom line, is how much does it cost to deliver? What are the things that have happened in the last 10 to 15 years that have changed the equation? And this is my personal, most people know I'm always harping on this, is that the investment we make has a return on investment that permanently reduces operating costs, not just solving problems. And from your worldwide experience in your company, this is what you do. What are you seeing? What are the examples out there that could give us hope that this money can go as far as we need it to? And
Well, George, that's why I say it's the opportunity of a lifetime. Before I go there, though, I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity, for all of our utility colleagues on the front line that are out there. I mean, the work they've done during this pandemic is just unbelievable, just unbelievable. And so it's a big, expression of gratitude for all of you in terms of what you've done to keep the water flowing and keep it clean and quality, et cetera. And I also want to say, I mean, we kind of expressed this, but I always like to bring it down to brass tacks. Can anyone here or those that are watching imagine going a day or two or a week or a month without access to clean water or potable water? That's what we're talking about. Any one of our utility colleagues, I mean, when they get up in the morning, they're thinking about, how do I provide safe, clean drinking water, hygienic, at the most affordable price possible? How do I manage the wastewater going on? All this stuff behind the scenes. I just bring it, George, I bring it back to basic brass tacks here. And unless you've gone a day without water and experiencing that, it's behind the scenes. You just take it for granted. You turn the faucet on, the water comes out. People don't pay attention to the water bill, except whenever it's 20% of your take-home pay. The rest of us, it's like, okay, out of sight, out of mind. So to your question around how can, not just technology, but innovation is not always an engineering solution. What are the solutions that are out there right now that maybe didn't exist years ago to help reduce the cost of the infrastructure, both operating cost, but also new capital investment that gets layered into a rate case that people will get, an increased water bill. We could go through a number of these examples, and it's not about Xylem. I mean, we pride ourselves on being a technology leader, but there are a lot of companies that are out there that are focusing on this. So I'll give you two examples. And I always go back to, what are the big problems that the utilities are trying to solve for? A technology company like Xylem, we could work on a lot of stuff that's interesting, fun, but if it's not going to solve a problem for the utility, what's the point? And so one example is, it was mentioned earlier, one of the big challenges facing utilities and communities across the US right now is what's called stormwater overflow. Okay. It's when you got too much water, you don't want it. It's a pain in the backside. It's a big problem. And there are a number of communities across the US that are facing consent decrees with the EPA for good reason. This is a quality of life issue. But they can be really expensive. We're talking billions of dollars that are required. So one example is in South Bend. We've got a number of these where at the time, Mayor Pete, now Secretary Pete, was there, and he was facing a consent decree. And it was going to cost about $850 million, I believe. And it was going to be building a big encatchment, capture the water, underground tunnel, classic engineered construction. The team that we have, we're able to go in and look at how do we use sensor and other, artificial intelligence means to modernize the existing infrastructure so it could perform in a smarter way during a live storm event. Now, they still had to go do a capital investment, but it was a fraction of what it was otherwise going to have to be. And we've got countless examples of that around the country and the world, quite frankly. So just helping our utilities modernize their existing infrastructure without having to do the big CapEx play, which ends up in people's water bills. Secondly, one of the biggest challenges that utilities face is what's called non-revenue water. So it's basically, utilities, produce fresh, clean drinking water. It's distributed, intended to be distributed where it's going to be used by a homeowner, industrial, commercial building, et cetera. And either it's physically lost along the way, or it's never adequately metered or billed. And it's a revenue loss. I mean, these are real operating costs that utilities are investing in. It costs taxpayers money. And the water never makes it to its end use, or it's not billed for. And we've got a number of examples where we're using technology to help utilities be able to better monitor their existing pipelines, see where leaks are, see where somebody might be hijacking water off the pipeline, or where it's not being effectively metered or monitored along the way. So there's a whole array of technologies, George, that are out there. Again, it's not limited to Xylem. I mean, there are a lot of great companies out there providing these capabilities, but we've got to find a way to educate our decision makers at a political level as to, we throw around this 1 trillion, 2 trillion, whatever the number is. We will never afford that in this country. It's not going to happen, but we don't need to. The technologies exist to do all that at a fraction of what we're talking about, but it takes new, fresh thinking to move that forward.
That's a hopeful message, Patrick, and particularly hopeful that the first example you used is a mayor who is now at Secretary of Transportation. So the opportunity of having
Right
someone
down
who knows
the street.
campaigned on sewers for president, for God's sake.
Yeah.
But the story that you tell, my recollection in South Bend saved $400 or $500 million. And you're right, many companies have these opportunities. The question, and I'll stick with you again on this one, is it sometimes seems, there's conversation in the industry that there's a lot more innovations out there than are being embraced by utilities, and how we can help utilities identify, customize, and implement these solutions. What are your thoughts on that from what you've seen?
I think personally, I feel that the industry, the utility leaders are unfairly criticized for being risk adverse. And I think the reality is, as I mentioned earlier, these leaders and their teams are busting their backsides every day to make sure they provide safe, clean drinking water at an affordable price to our citizens. There's not a lot of upside to taking a risk. There's a whole lot of downside for taking a risk. And so, what we as technology providers need to do is continue to build partnerships, doing pilots, contained situation. We can prove the technology. George, you and I talked about this. I think the role that a technology provider like Xylem or others can do is the last thing I'm going to do as a CEO of a publicly listed company, a water company, is to jeopardize the reputation of Xylem. I would never go into a utility and pitch them an idea that we didn't know was completely proven. And so I think what we can do on behalf of utility leaders is we basically do the diligence on technologies. You don't have time to be testing different stuff. That's our job, is to make sure that we bring you the best solutions possible. And then, make sure that we're solving a problem that matters to the two of you. It's not just because we're doing it for fun. We're trying to focus on those problems that really matter for you. So put the pressure on us. Let us do the work in this area. And then if you don't like it, kick us out. Let's move on to the next the next challenge along the way.
Well, I love that, Patrick, because what we've heard is this incredible need and all the benefits that come from investment in water infrastructure. But as you said, there'll never be enough. So if we don't figure out a way to make the dollar go farther, we're ultimately going to fail, even with a significant bill. But
That's correct.
Let me come to you, Adam. And this, by the way, we're getting questions in from the audience. So this is very question from the audience. It is an opportunity of lifetime, this infrastructure legislation. If it's passed, that's the first big question, and it will play out over 10 years. What do you think the critical policy issues are that need to be implemented to make sure the opportunity process turns into a reality?
It's a great question. In terms of the stimulus package, which is a 7 or so year sort of bill, right? The nice part of that is, while I would sort of like to see a major injection of grant funding, right? That's the first thing I want to say very quickly, is I'd like to see grant funding, not more.
This is the
Andrew.
Washington lobbyist taking the opportunity of a
We laugh
lifetime.
because we have these conversations all the
All the
time, and it's
time.
like, wow, I'm shocked he's saying that, right? Not, so that's a big one. One is, a lot of stimulus packages are, you get the money and it goes out and it's immediate. One of the things I've been arguing for a long time is the permanence issue. Right, we need government to take a role. And this isn't just water infrastructure, by the way. It's infrastructure writ large, a holistic view of what our priorities are, with significant funding as a partner coming out that's reliable and consistent, that is additive, right, to what the utilities do. So one is the grant component, one is the timing component. So seeing it happen, if it was more over a 5 to 7 year, 10-year period, that's the beginning to me of a more permanent approach to infrastructure, which I think is good. Grants versus loans. I think we've already gone down the loan road. We're well funded on loans between WIFIA and the SRF. Could we use more? Sure. But I think from a stimulus package where you're trying to create jobs, you want grant funding to go in and be additive. So that's another side of it. And then the third is this low income issue that we've been talking a lot about. And to me, it is an issue of affordability. And the problem becomes somewhat of a political one, which is that if you can't take some sort of action on the affordability issue, and I think the federal government can play a key role, you can't charge the true value of water. You cannot get there. It becomes a rate setting issue. So if the federal government can come in as a partner and help us to alleviate that issue at the local level, it does free us up to a great degree as utilities across the country to begin to move toward what really is the true value of water, for those who really at the local level should be paying exactly that. So those are the three components I would love to see included in any thoughtful legislation going forward.
I love that, Adam. And I know that we've all had experience on the utility side. Your low income customers, it's the right thing to provide support for them, but it is also, if you don't, it limits your ability to raise rates on everybody else. If you don't have an answer for that, which is important on a values and a moral basis, but as a business, you need that answer. Patrick's suggesting one of it, which is to lower permanent costs, but the other is to have a permanent program that supports that part of the rate base so that you can have the appropriate price charged for the rest of the rate base.
And just to underscore very quickly Patrick's point about the role of the digital utility, the technology approaches, those are vital in terms of how we address this issue. And that should also be a component of any major legislation.
Well, we're right near wrapping up. So I'm going to do a lightning round. You have choice of two last questions. One was one I had prepared, another came in from the audience. Either, what do you see the water sector looking like because of the opportunity you have before us? Or what do you think is the message that was most likely to resonate to get people to do the things we need, to contact their local rep? So you have choice. I'll just go straight across the line here, and then I'm going to give Patrick the final word. Tell us a little bit about where we are today. But Andrew.
So I think if we embrace this moment, this water's moment, we have the opportunity, and I'm thinking about the first question, frankly, what is it we can do? So if we embrace this moment and we think about 10 years from now, I think just about everything that I've heard today will be part of 10 years from now. To the extent we can actually figure out a way to ensure that our communities are protected and they continue to remain where they live, that will be a legacy instrument. That will be a legacy residue, if you will, of this moment. To Patrick's point, if we can start to think about the innovation that is needed, we have invested in water for the last 45 years, and we have pursued certain approaches. I think it's going to be really important for us to be innovative. So technology will be fundamental to that. Integrated planning, as Kishia talked about, will be incredibly important. To Adam's point, in terms of elevating the sector, that's going to be important. So the idea 10 years from now, we should ensure that our communities are built in a sustainable way. They live where they work. They can remain after the investments, the green infrastructure investments. We have become way more innovative in terms of the technology that we're using. We're safer. We have greater public trust in our water sector, and both drinking water and wastewater. So 10 years from now, I see a sector that has evolved. It has evolved from just a pollutant-based, regulatory focus to one that is outcome-based. And just about every part of what we're focusing on is to ensure results that are mutually beneficial to the customers, to the American customers. Kishia made this particularly important point, and I'll end here. The business of government is to ensure that we have, at least the business of the office that I work in, is to ensure that we have safe water, both drinking water and water quality. As we pursue the decisions that we're making, it is fundamentally important that the people who are impacted by our decisions are at the table. And I think to the extent we can do that, we will see a water infrastructure in the next 10 years that is serving all Americans, not just a few Americans.
God bless you. Thank you, Andrew.
I think we probably should have ended on
Yeah,
that
that's like
point.
the.
But to just build on it, I think we have been working very diligently to change the conversation. To go from we're just here and we're just trying to make improvements to improve water quality and to be good stewards of the environment. All of that remains the same. That is true. But this is also an economic conversation. Investing in water infrastructure means jobs. Water fuels economies. This is an opportunity for, and I said this at the first hearing that I spoke at, it is time for give water a shot to get this country back on its feet. All of the social ills, the economic ills, the environmental ills that we have in our society, we can be a part of resolving those challenges. And I just wanted to touch on something that Andrew said earlier and to speak to the innovation piece. What DC Water is doing, and we're fortunate enough to be in a position where we are handling the basic business. We're dealing with the pipes and pump stations and Blue Plains wastewater treatment plant. We're carrying out our core mission. Now we're looking beyond to see how do we reduce our operating costs? How do we help in other ways reduce the energy burden on communities? Again, speaking to the affordability issue. And how do we go beyond just focusing on adapting to climate change and start being part of the mitigation measures for climate change? So we're right now looking at building a portfolio of energy opportunity projects, started with work that you're familiar with, and Mr. Gaddis, our current CEO, he and the board has made it a priority for us to move forward with projects that help the district achieve its carbon neutrality goals and racial equity goals. So I think that in 10 years, as Andrew said, we will be in a position where we will have changed the conversation. Folks will understand the value that we bring. It's not just the value of water, but it's the value of the sector and the people in the sector and what we really mean to this country at a time like this and beyond.
God bless you. I'm going to go a little out of order, so we'll end with you, Patrick, because you can tell us a little bit, because we're right at time for the program, which has gone by so quickly with such great.
Well, in the interest of time, yesterday was Mother's Day. So I think the message 10 years ago should be motherhood, apple pie, and water infrastructure. Then I'll be a happy camper. That's it.
That's
Patrick,
great. That's great.
You have the final word.
Maybe I dropped the mic with that.
We're sitting here on the Anacostia River.
Yeah,
quite
we're
the
sitting here on the
story,
Anacostia River.
Tell us where we are. You've welcomed
Yeah,
us
so
into
before I
that.
go there, before I talk about this space, this
Yeah.
beautiful space that we've just signed a lease on and occupied here. To me, like, what can we do to kind of get engagement? I think it's youth. It's the younger generation. And that's a big part of what we're doing at Xylem is to create awareness, whether it be through our partnerships with different organizations, Manchester City on a global stage, NYC Football Club. All of that's about getting access to youth, getting water on their mind. Because when they hear the challenges that we're facing, when they hear, by 2050, 25% facing absolute water scarcity, they hear the affordability issue, the youth look at this and say, this is what you're leaving us? Like, this is what we're inheriting? And then when they hear the technologies exist to actually do this in an affordable way, it's like, well, what are we waiting on? Like, what's the problem? And so I've gotten to the point where our big momentum is to say, create this almost kind of like incredible urge and anxiety amongst the younger generation. It's like, we will not tolerate this. We will not tolerate this. And then become politically active and get out and get the word out that this is unacceptable. This is ridiculous that we are still having this conversation decades on around water, which is the essence. I go back to, can you imagine a day or a week or a month that you didn't actually have access to water? That's happening around this country. It's happening around the world, and it is unacceptable. And I believe that youth, this is the generation, in my view, that is going to make that difference. I truly believe that. Maybe I'm an optimist. I know you are too, George. I think we all are, obviously. We wouldn't be doing what we do if it weren't for the fact that we have a passion about this. But this is our time. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. To this space, we are here at 301 Water Street, right off the Anacostia River here in DC. It's a beautiful spot. And the purpose of this center is, it's going to be called a reservoir. And the idea is that it's a communal space. There's no place that we can see right now around the US where people cross the water sector, whether it be policymakers, whether it be utilities, whether it be NGOs, whether it be startups, that they have a place to convene a conversation in one spot. And that's the purpose of this office. Xylem will have a small, tiny little area over in the corner for people to come through and work on innovation technology, but it really is a communal space. And we just thought, it's much needed. And now is the time. And, things converge at the right time. And how appropriate, George, that it's 301 Water Street. And it's right down the street from DC Water. It's walking steps from Capitol Hill. So it's a great time to be here. And we're really excited about a lot more to come on how we launch this and how we convene and how we invite. But anybody out there watching and listening that wants to use the space, open door. It's for the community. It's not for us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Patrick. I know we're at time. I want to first express my appreciation. I took enormous numbers of notes. That was an insight and values and the call to arms, the call to action.
It's part of your next book.
It's wonderful to have been part of this panel. It's been a privilege for me. Thank you, Xylem, for the space. I look forward to seeing it as all unfolds. Throw a baseball to the stadium or to DC Water.
That's right. We're right down the street from National Stadium.
So it's a wonderful place. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And it's been a pleasure. Please take a look at what's happening for the rest of the week for Infrastructure Week. There will be more programs on water. It's all week long. Water infrastructure is a driver. You heard it. Talk to your local communities, talk to your local representative. Let's make this message go. Thank you kindly. Bye-bye.